Why does the 70s sound like this? Hi guys, welcome back to another video. Today I want to do kind of a deep dive on the sound of the 70s, why the 70s sound like that, the gear, the mixing mindset behind it, what it looked like in the studio, all of that. Now the 70s is a really iconic era, and I think a lot of that was brought to light for younger people by Silk Sonic with Anderson .Paak and Bruno Mars. And when people heard that album for the first time, or the first single, immediately it was like, oh, that's so 70s. But what does that actually mean? You know, like, what does it actually mean for something to sound 70s? You know, is it the gear? Is it the mindset behind it? Or is it something else entirely? So let's take a deep dive into the magic behind the sound of the 70s recordings. Now, I want to start off by saying that, like, I was born in 2006. So obviously I don't have any firsthand experience with any of this. My dad worked in a studio, not in the 70s though, more in the 80s and 90s. He worked at a studio in New York called the Power Station. I'm interning at a studio right now, and I've done a lot of research on the 70s, the gear, the innovations, what studios kind of looked like, because I've always been very interested in this as well. Now, I want to start off with the gear. Sound signals traveling through tape, tube, FET circuits, analog circuits like that. That must be the sound of the 70s, right? Well, let's talk microphones. The 70s was a pretty big move in the industry when we went away from a little bit more noisy and finicky tube mics to FET circuit mics. So think Neumann, think AKG, think Soyuz. But as well, you know, you have the dynamics like Sennheiser, RE20, which I have one, hold on. RE20, and my 57 is on my snare right now. So a lot of these mics, I'd say all of these mics are still used to great effect today. I think whether you're going for modern or vintage recording, you're still gonna go towards these mics that were invented in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Now, also in the 70s, we see the rise of solid state mixing and recording consoles. So this is a direct quote from the Neve website actually here. Rather than use existing module designs, the Wessex 88 was the first to employ the new module, the Neve 1073. So we see the rise of Neve consoles and the first use of the iconic 1073. Still very popular today, and a very popular plugin as well. Now, as well as Neve, we also see API, SSL, you know, each with their own unique sound and still used a lot today. We're gonna see that a lot of the inventions, developments, and innovations in the 70s are industry standards now today. Now, as for outboard gear, we have Pultec EQ, 1176, FET compressors, and Opto LA2A compressors. Now, name a more iconic trio than that. That alone right there is a golden vocal chain. The Pultec EQ was loved for its boost and attenuation features. 1176, a fast attack FET bass compressor, essential for drums, vocals, guitars, and gave the 70s its signature punchy sound. Now, the 2A, a slower opto bass compressor known for its smooth, natural compression, perfect for bass or vocals. While the 70s is known for being very dry, we still do see the use of the 1960s EMT plate reverb. Now, you might know a plate reverb as a preset in your Valhalla reverbs, vintage verbs, but it was actually a physical big sheet of metal that was typically like in the basement of a studio, where the signal would go to, the plate would vibrate and resonate, and then there would be a pickup on the other side, and that would be your reverb. It sounded more natural than a spring, but definitely didn't sound like a room. It was its own distinct, very sought after sound. And also, we have a very famous tape delay unit. The Echoplex added that vintage tape echo sound to guitars and vocals, giving the recordings of the 70s a dreamy and often psychedelic vibe. Now, this is the part that made me really excited to make the video. The gear had so much to do with the sound, but it all started from the source. the people behind the sound. Now, I've seen a lot of videos of how to get that vintage vibe sound, how to get that tape sound, that 70s sound, and it's usually someone with a high fidelity, maybe drum recording or something like that, and then they're putting a plugin on it to degrade the sound, lo-fi the sound, oversaturate the sound, and this definitely does like allude to the sound of the 70s. It has that warm sound, but they're thinking about it from the wrong direction. I think it could be more helpful to think about it from the perspective of an engineer in the 70s. The engineers in the 70s, like, obviously weren't going for a 70s vibe sound. They had the tools that were allotted to them, and they were trying to make really high fidelity recordings with the limitations that the gear gave them. Now, what were these resources? Well, first, they were very limited with their tracks. Now, in the 70s, you might have a 24 track, which at the time felt limitless. But today, with modern DAWs, you know, you have projects that have over 100 tracks because you're just adding something, little ear candy there. Oh, I want to add a little bit of a layer there. But that wasn't even something that was in their mind at the time. When they were given more tracks than before, they were like, wow, I can close mic the drums. I can put a mic dedicated to just the snare. I could put a mic in the kick drum. Stuff like that. So that's where we start getting that really close, punchy, dead sound with the drums. You know, you put a little towel either covering the whole drum or just touching the drum head a little bit, shortening the decay, and also engineers isolating the drums from the guitars, really giving themselves the most amount of control about each individual part of the mix. Also, because of the limitation with, you know, tape and the limit of tracks, a lot of things had to be committed, a lot of things had to be printed to tape. Maybe you were recording with all of these mics on the drums, but that took up a lot of tracks. You wanted to bounce all of the drums onto one track to open up more space. You would have to commit to everything you did in terms of mixing and effects on the snare, the kick, all of that individual, and you would have to commit it into one drum track. And today, with modern DAWs, you can really get lost in just coming back to a project a week later and tweaking the EQs, making little adjustments, tweaking until you just get it perfect. And that's definitely not the mindset that engineers were having back then. There's a lot more smaller but broad strokes instead of fine, like, you know, a graphic EQ getting rid of like one frequency. That wasn't a thing. The engineer made their choices and then it was committed to tape. Now, another big thing that you think of when you might think of 70s is the instruments that they're using. Now, there's the obvious ones like guitar, drums, bass, keys, vocal, but let's actually talk about that. A very common drum brand for 70s recordings and even 60s recordings was Ludwig. You know, a Ludwig is what Ringo used. A Ludwig kit is really known for its punchy and vintage sound because it was used on all of those records. And a Ludwig Superlight and a Ludwig Black Beauty are very iconic snares that were used on so many records. And for bass, a big sound of the 70s was a muted Fender Precision bass, typically with flat wounds on it too, depending on what genre. I'm talking a little bit more about soul recordings, maybe 70s Motown. This was a really punchy yet smooth bass tone that really supported the mix, but it never really cut through. And when I think of 70s, I typically think about a Fender Rhodes. I think that was a big sound of the 70s. Could be really bell-like, or you could drive it up in some blues recordings. It's perfect for soul, jazz, funk, that quintessential 70s genre. And as we get a little bit more into the 80s, it was definitely found its way into rock and pop. It became an incredibly versatile instrument. And the last thing I'm going to talk about here for the 70s is something that is true about recordings before the digital age of DAWs. It's something that a lot of people point to. I read a lot of forums of people being like, what's like the 70s sound? And a lot of people are like, it's the human element and it's the human touch. You know, it's the drums that weren't programmed. It's everyone being a band in the room, bouncing ideas off each other, playing off each other. not locked into any kind of grid. There's a level of interaction and spontaneity. There were imperfections because cutting and comping wasn't really a thing. Like, you had to physically cut the tape. Like, it was a lot of musicians at the top of their game to hopefully get it right the first time and not have to do a bunch of overdubs, if at all possible, not trying to have to redo things or cut it later. It was people trying to give the best sound, the best performance at the start, at the source. Engineers and musicians embracing the imperfection, giving it that soul, that touch, that warmth that we love from the 70s. And also, I'm gonna touch on something that I'm definitely gonna talk about in another video, but it was hard to research this without getting the typical, there's no human touch in modern music now. Modern music sucks. It's all fake, it's all digital, it's all just made in the computer, it's not real music, all this stuff. And being someone that really appreciates old recordings, the way that it was done back then, loves the vintage sound, I also love modern music so much. I love pop music today. It's what I listen to the most, definitely. And I can absolutely see where a lot of these people are coming from, but I also disagree with that take on modern music, and that's a video for another time that I'm gonna make. But I just know when doing a lot of research for this video, that was something that came up a lot. All of these factors, the gear, the mindset, the performance, the people in the room, all of that together contributes and makes the sound of the 70s. It's not something that can be captured with a plugin. It's not something that can be captured with a microphone. It's the mindset. It's what was going on in the world in the 70s. It's how people were feeling in the 70s. And it's what people wanted to say in the 70s. And these microphones, they all had a part in it, but overall, that was just a medium that a message was told through. And that's true about every genre, and that's still true today. That's what music is. It's an art, it's a message. It doesn't matter how it's done, as long as the message is still conveyed. All right, so that was my deep dive on the 70s sound. If I missed anything of importance, please leave it in the comment. Make sure to like, make sure to subscribe. I'll be doing 60s, I'll be doing 80s, I'll be doing 90s, I'll be doing 2000s even. And maybe I'll go all the way back to some of the first music recordings. I think that could be very interesting. So just let me know what you'd like to see in the comments, or if I missed anything, and I'll see you in the next one.